As a quick bit of housekeeping, your computer is working fine. We've disabled the chat, we've disabled the video, so nothing's wrong with you. That's just the way we're going to have this great session go forward, as a way to really focus on all the good things that our speakers have to say and make sure that we have the chance to really focus and listen to the great insights they're going to give us. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as your Executive Director of the Coalition for American Public Diplomacy and Leadership. We're so glad to have you as part of Capital as we get this initiative really underway to strengthen and expand the State Department's Bridge USA programs through great educational programs like this to talk about how these programs advance U.S. interests. And then, as you all know, by bringing together a global set of stakeholders to share best practices and really take these programs that we know deliver so much and make them even richer than they are before. As I mentioned, we're going to have a great conversation among our two panelists who need no introduction, but I will introduce them in just a minute. And then as we go through the conversation, what we're really excited about is the chance to showcase for you those great connections between Bridge USA and economic prosperity. We talk so much about the ways these programs contribute, and today we get to delve into just one element of that and really unpack some of the tools and arguments that you can make when folks ask you, why is Bridge USA important? What does it do? What does it deliver? Hopefully we'll draw out some of that great wisdom today. And the folks who are going to be providing that wisdom, in alphabetical order, of course. First is John Basilisi, who is Executive Vice President and Head of Government Relations at BDV Solutions. Previously, John was the Vice President of Immigration Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Prior to his time at the Chamber, John was a lead immigration advisor for then Senator Marco Rubio for 3.5 years. He's also a professor at Cornell Law School, and of course his most distinguished title is he's a member of the Board of Directors of Capital. So John, thank you for being here with us, and thank you for all of the service that you do for Capital. Our other panelist perhaps needs no introduction, but you may know Marie Royce as a businesswoman and a diplomat and an educator. In particular, she was Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs from March of 2018 through January of 2021. And during her time, she led ECA's highest budget at $760 million and oversaw a team of 674 employees. But in particular, one of her main contributions, of course, was coining the term Bridge USA and really giving it that identity that we all know and use today. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Award for Leadership in Global Education, the Order of Civil Merit, and a Commander for the Kingdom of Spain, as well as Distinguished Alumni Awards and many other prestigious titles. So we're very pleased to have both of these great speakers here with us today to share their insights on those connections between this wonderful Bridge USA program that we love and economic prosperity, broadly defined. So to jump right in, excuse me, Maria, I'm going to start with you. In what ways does Bridge USA contribute to prosperity, especially in the US? And if you have any great examples of how Bridge USA participants helped a business deliver on something or address some kind of shortfall, we'd love to hear those as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Carmen. First of all, like I said before we started, I love your enthusiasm. So thank you. And I want to say thank you to everyone here that is joining. I also want to recognize Rick Ruth, who's on the board. Rick was a great senior executive service advisor for me and previous assistant secretary. So you've got good guidance with him. So I want to just say quickly, well, you mentioned the rebranding, or I should say the branding of the program. This branding exercise started when I began my position as Assistant Secretary of State. I remember when people were doing something on Capitol Hill called J-Day. And I said, J-Day, that's really not acceptable. We can't just call people by a visa number like a J-1. And I had the opportunity to go around the world, and luckily, because of the way we integrated the J1s into our alumni programs, I got to meet a lot of these people. And what I really saw from a lot of these people was leadership. And what I really want to do is strengthen the brand. And just so you know, as for those that are not aware, we probably communicated with about 5,000 people when we talked about what types of brand attributes do we want to have. My undergraduate degree was in marketing. I started my career with Procter & Gamble. I felt very strongly about it. And so I think that the tagline is perfect, which we agreed on, which is connecting global leaders, creating lasting impact. So I really believe that that really talks about the J1s. So the question you've asked is, what can we do regarding prosperity? I think we have to keep in mind how we can really keep this program at a high level and strengthen it. And one that came to my mind was a memorandum of understanding that I did with the country of Portugal in the treaty room. And it was basically between the United States and Portugal, which was to create an internship program over 5 years with 400 interns on both sides. And what were the areas? Advanced manufacturing was a big part of it. And the goal was to take these trainees and interns and to create a programs where we actually have trade between the two countries, research and knowledge sharing of the trainees, and actually help Portuguese businesses and U.S. businesses. So this is a good example of how we can contribute to prosperity. I know we talked, Carmen, you and I, before we started, about measuring impact. You know, that's a good example of a program. It would be really wonderful to know some of that impact and where it is today. So I just want to share that. I think it's really important that we continue to think of ways, whether it's a program back to Latin America or program back and forth to Europe, of how we can use the trade and quantify the results. So thanks for asking that question.
Thanks. John, how about you? In what ways do you see Bridge USA contributing to prosperity?
Carmen, one, thank you for having me on today. And two, I want to thank you and Carrie Duffin for, inviting me to be part of the Capitol board. Because when I first got to Capitol Hill and when I first got to the chamber, this wasn't something that the business community showed all that much interest in. And I think there's various and sundry reasons for that. But as the labor market has gotten incredibly tight, all sorts of businesses are looking for ways to meet their workforce needs. And yes, I know this is a cultural exchange program. It's not supposed to be a work program, but there's a work component to this. And, I think of all the university students that come in here on J1s. I think of the foreign medical graduates who will get a J1 waiver at some point and help provide much needed medical care in either, an urban setting or a very, very rural setting where the need for doctors is incredibly high. Your health is your wealth in that regard. And, most of the companies that I worked with in my last job, the vast majority of them were smaller businesses, and they were reliant on the summer work travel program. And, that was, the more I learned about what the program does and who uses it, it became abundantly clear to me, like, this is part of like my, my childhood, because I did an awful lot of vacationing up in Lake George, New York, which anybody who's from the area, the Adirondacks, it's not the most densely populated area in the state. And trying to get anybody who's getting you on a ride, it used to be the Great Escape, and then it became the Great Escape in Splashwater Kingdom, and now Six Flags owns it. But any restaurant you go to, any of the smaller hotels you stay at, they have a ton of J1 workers there that make that community run. And, those communities would be fractions of the size they are today if they didn't have a program like this they could turn to during their busy season. So that to me is what, when I think of J1s and how it helps contribute to American prosperity, I think of the small business owner that's running a hotel, running a restaurant, or running an amusement park in a very, rural part of the country.
So, John, to build on that, you talked about how the J1 program is not just a work program. It really is a cultural exchange experience. Do you have any examples, or can you talk to us about how Bridge USA programs facilitate that exchange of ideas about the US approach to entrepreneurship or self-reliance or private enterprise? How those ideas get shared back and forth during the program?
Well, during the program, a lot of people that have been participants of the program, actually met with a few of them yesterday. They come back on their second, third trip. They do the high school program. They come back and they want to do intern trainee, or you think of how the relationships that get built between American citizens and foreign nationals. It is to me an indispensable soft power tool if the United States is going to be able, both now and in the future, to project power. Because being able to build these relationships, you hear the phrase all politics is local, but in this case, like, you have to be able to build relationships, and this is like the international equivalent of the grassroots level of things. Can you actually build a friendship with someone? If you can build a friendship with someone, you can build trade relationships with someone. People that use the J1 programs, all the participants that come in, like, they have a very positive view of the United States once they go through their program. So the idea that we want to curtail this, we want to limit this, and there have been times in the past where we've seen threats to, it was the J1 program back in the day, but now it's the Bridge USA program. Like, we've seen this movie before. It never really ends well, because once American people understand what's at stake, they're like, we can't get rid of this. Like, there's not much bathwater here. There's an awful lot of baby. So we've got to keep it. And it's not a matter of keeping it. It's just, we got to build on this, and we have to be able to make sure that we can continue to have these types of relationships get built at the micro level. So in the macro level, when threats arise, and they tend to arise every now and then, we need to be able to rely on our friends and know that they have our back and we have theirs. It's incredibly important to be able to see those types of, it's not so much the ideas that happen during someone working at a summer work travel job, but the idea that America's good and they go home and they share that idea. It's pays enormous dividends to the American people in our country.
Thank you. Marie, how about you? Any examples you know of where we've built that understanding, not just at the highest level that America is good, but particularly self-reliance, entrepreneurship, and some of those ideas?
Well, I'll just kind of first piggyback on John's comments and then kind of address what you just said. But I know you sent it out to your organization, the video on Ambassador Daniel Mulhall. And I want to encourage everyone to watch that if you haven't done so. And I think it's really important just to say that Ambassador Mulhall came to me as soon as I came into my job. And he was a 19-year-old from Waterford, Ireland, not knowing anyone who had really traveled internationally. And he got a position at a restaurant out in Kansas City, Missouri. And he went on to become the highest person in the United States from a diplomatic standpoint as ambassador of Ireland. And that was a life-changing thing. And he told me that he had plans to go back out and go to the restaurant. And he remembered fondly the Irish-American businessman that took him out to baseball games. And he got to do all these cultural things when he had that experience. And he really got to love the United States. So I asked him if we could send a camera crew out to go with him. And that's really what you see in the video. Now, I want to let you know, and I don't know, I can't remember if Rick was part of it at the time, and I think he might have been, but we brought that video up to Capitol Hill. And when we talked to the foreign relations staff, when they saw the video, one of the lead people said, "Now this is exactly the way it's supposed to be." Okay. And the reason I bring that up to everyone is we have to really ensure that we have this incredible exchange with these participants, which includes all the cultural aspects. And then they go back. He also brought other ministers in to meet with me as well. But I'll just bring that up as a great example of a great exchange. And you asked about self-reliance and entrepreneurship. I really think a lot of these people, I mean, really all gain that self-reliance. It's the people that come here having never traveled before that pay their own money. We do have one program. I was really amazed. These were young people that were part of a focus group for Bridge USA. I was trying to understand how they could even afford to come here. And they told me they were actually from Eastern Europe. They said that they went around to family members and friends and they said, we want you to invest in us. And so when they came to the United States, they really improved their English. So I also will tell you, we also love to have the U.S. as the #1 destination for students, which is the F1s. And during my time in 2019, we hit the highest numbers of international students coming to the U.S. But it's really important to learn English, and it's also a good counterweight to disinformation. People can read American content. It's really important. So anyway, and then you asked the question about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is incredibly important. We have existing programs where people have some trade relations, or you might even talk about research. I was reading about researchers. Some of that research is so important and cutting edge in the area of STEM that some of those small businesses could never be creators of some of this technology and innovation, which is all about small business. If it wasn't about having some of these researchers come over as part of the Bridge USA program.
That's great. And John, you talked a lot about the impact on small businesses as well. We think about J1 really and Bridge USA programs as being part of that fabric across all 50 states of the US and in so many different roles. Are there examples that either of you would share about a small business or a larger business that really took the Bridge USA program to heart and really made it their own, and it helped them as a business as well as the participants? John, you're on mute, friend.
Son of a gun. All right, take two. I can think of a few businesses where this stands out. And I'm not trying to toot the horn of one of my fellow board members, but the good folks down in Morey's Piers in Wildwood, New Jersey. I've been there. I've gone to the parks. I've taken my eldest son there. Not just because I don't have anything. Not like I'm trying to not bring my 2-year-old, but he wasn't born at the time when we went. But you see the community that they build among all the J1 participants. It's really something else, because for them, that area of New Jersey there's not a lot of people there. So during like the off season, like the high school is very small. So even if you could get all the folks that go to high school and employ them there, you still wouldn't have enough folks to run all the things that Morey's does down in that part of New Jersey. You look at what the success that they have. It's almost as if all the good work they do, it's like a recruiting tool for the next generation of summer work travel participants for years to come, because everybody hears about it. Like, listen, if you go to Morey's, you have a great time. You will learn a lot about America. You'll have fun working in your job. Like, you're in a water park. You're in the sun all day during the summertime. It's one of those things where I think they're second to their. I don't want to play favorites here, but like they're really, really good. And there are many other amusement parks. Like I think of the Great Escape where I grew up. I think of Knoebels in central Pennsylvania comes to mind. There's another one up in New Hampshire. The name is evading me, although I've been there with my sister and her kids when they were really small. You see these businesses and they're able to operate and they thrive because they have the folks that they need to operate the rides, operate the concession stands. And I can give you a little bit of a side by side, like what happens when you don't have that. Anybody who's from Western Pennsylvania, you've ever been to Idlewild and Soak Zone, it's off of Route 30. It's a little ways east of Pittsburgh. And my wife and we took my son Christian there when he was probably, I want to say 6. He hadn't turned 7 yet. But it was like the summer post-COVID. And you could see what happened when they didn't have nearly enough people to basically run the park. You had roller coasters. They were like, if you want to go on this one roller coaster, it's open from 9 to 12. If you don't get there by 12, you're not riding it. The other roller coaster is open from 2 to 5. You wanted to eat anywhere, they had several concession stands. Only one was open. And you see the struggles that they have because then you're dealing with customers like, well, what's going on here? Why are these attractions closed? Why are you not doing this anymore? It's not because they don't want to, it's because they couldn't. They just didn't have the staff to make it operate. And that's the type of thing, if we start, it's not just for summer work travel, but the other J1 programs too. If you start to curtail the usage of it, you're going to see the negative aspects of those types of policy decisions. And those will be the consequences. And that's what's at stake here. So, if we're going to limit access to J1s or Bridge USA program participants, we're going to have more business disruption, more problems, and it's going to be a kneecap on what these businesses could achieve from a revenue standpoint. And all that trickles down into they make less money, they pay less tax dollars to the local communities. Like, it all trickles down. Everything's interconnected here. So
I grew up about a stone's throw from Idlewild, so I agree with you. We need to make sure they're staffed up and ready to go for all my family and friends.
Listen, you want to be able to ride the spider and the roller coaster. I get it.
Marie, how about you? Do you have any good examples?
Well, I was going to let you know that when I worked at the State Department, I wrote an article for the Foreign Service Journal, and it was called How Exchanges Pay Off for Americans. And I think that was very important to do because we often have conversations around the benefits of us having those friendships overseas, but we don't necessarily have stories and talk about or quantify about the importance of how it impacts Americans. I just was doing a little research online and I read a great article about Colorado schools using teachers in the teacher category and how a lot of these schools would not be able to stay open. And especially, even in the rural area, if they didn't have some of these teachers. And these teachers come and I understand these teachers in Colorado are coming for 3 years. And it really benefits the students too, because they're getting exposed to different countries that they would never be exposed to. And they had a great story about a woman who is from Philippines, as an example, who was a teacher, and she actually taught science and was, outstanding for the students to have her. So that's a good example. And then to piggyback on what John said about being able to stay open longer, with a lot of the schools, starting up in August, we can't keep, these programs open or these places. But with the summer work travel and the same thing with the winter, it's really important. So the businesses are able to obviously continue and support themselves by the fact that they can have the hours. So that's really important. I would also just say for those of us here in the call, I always called it the mom test. Like why does it matter? What would my mom think? Why are all these exchanges important? And I think the question you have to keep asking yourself is, how do they pay off for Americans? So if you can answer that question, I think it's a win-win.
Great. I'm going to ask my mom what she thinks and we'll go from there. And actually, to build on that, so when you read about workforce skills for the future and the kinds of things that companies and employees are going to need going forward, they talk about things like leadership and adaptability and problem solving, translating knowledge between different contexts. Are there ways that Bridge USA builds those skills in Americans as they encounter Bridge USA participants? And Marie, since you're smiling and nodding, I'm going to ask you first to weigh in.
Well, I think that all these programs are very helpful, and they create a structure. I also would add, even, I taught at a university full-time faculty for 3 years. And then I also ran internship programs when I was at Procter & Gamble. And I think, John, you're saying you're doing some teaching. Whenever you actually do have people at your company or organization, it's actually much more work than you expect. It actually helps you learn new skills because you have to create a structure. You have to create a structure to even bring a person on from Bridge USA into your organization. And that's very, very important. You have to create meaningful things for them to do. You need to create, a safe environment. You need to create cultural exchange. So that's really important. And then, of course, even if you're going to be a business, you're probably even teaching them what entrepreneurship really means. And self-reliance is another example. But a big one people come home back to their countries with is customer service. How do you solve a problem? How do you treat the guest? I know we've got some corporate sponsors I know that really do a lot in the area of customer service. And I'm sure that they have to actually create a program that they can teach this person, what the skill is. And of course, they bring that back to their country. So that's a very important thing, is a lot of these skills. And of course, our Americans are going to learn a lot of these skills. And the other nice thing is sometimes people even pick up some language skills. So, with all the different countries coming into the United States, I know a lot of people really benefit. And in some parts of the country, they might not really have heard much of a second language. And also, think about some of these, let's say restaurants or places on the boardwalk where they have international tourists. The fact that people are multilingual, and then maybe even your own team members can pick up some of these language skills, some basic words and things that could really help them with the customer. So there's just an amazing amount of things that you can create for your team members here in the United States. The other thing is, I would also say there's so many different categories. One thing I was thinking about was camp counselors. The camp counselor, I believe I'm doing this, I think you can come back twice, 2 years. But the types of skills that are imparted, and I think the biggest thing is when you're a young person, the fact that you have the opportunity to be on a summer camp is just an incredible lifetime thing. I think everyone here who's had an opportunity to go to a camp will still remember a lot of things about that camp experience. But the fact that that is also part of the Bridge USA program is really important. And there's lots of structure that can be brought to the camp environment from those people that are overseas, but you also are creating that structure. And who are the beneficiaries as young people? I remember that there were even some disabled young people that greatly benefited because I remember talking to the sponsors about it. So again, imagine what you're doing for these people that's going to change their life for the rest of their life with self-esteem. So in all these programs, they do that. I'm a big believer in work. So, but of course, not only just work, but also a whole program around it, which is what Bridge USA does. And lastly, I go back to the word leadership. This is all about leadership on the United States side and leadership on the international side.
Absolutely. John, your thoughts?
Carmen, I can relate to this personally because when I was in college, in undergrad, I, for some strange reason, thought it was wise to try to challenge myself. And I took the coursework for a bachelor's in science and economics. I had to take some classes that were graduate level. And you could see it play out in front of you in real time. The first 2 rows of the students in the class, they were all international students. I imagine some of them were J's. I imagine the vast majority of them were probably S. There were a few J's in there, probably coming in to do some sort of research work. And for someone as an American student there, watching how hard these people push themselves and how good they were, like, it is amazing to see how they could just do the matrices and vertices and just do it like it was, like doing regular straight division. It was insane. But like having them there gave me, the American student, some real perspective in terms of, I need to step my game up. I mean, some people, they see competition, they shy away from it. I am not like that. I'm sitting there saying, like, all right, I got to push myself and get better at this. And I feel like that type of element all too often gets lost, not just in the J1 debate, but in immigration writ large. Because if you want to be your best, you actually have to compete against some good competition. You can't just play Prairie View A&M 12 games in a season and expect to go to the national championship. You just can't do it. So like that, to me, as the recovering meathead with the football reference, I apologize, but it's one of those things where that benefits Americans in ways that, it's untold in the amount of like what you get out of that. Because once you realize, like, all right, I can push myself, you never realize how far you can go until you really start to push the envelope and see what it is that you can achieve. And the same thing goes for the folks that participate in these programs, because to them, and I have some long-lasting friendships with one guy named Easy from Nigeria and another person, I want to say he was from some other country in Africa. I mean, his name was my jock, but like they knew math really well. They also did not understand, their English skills were not that good when they first showed up. But over time, we began to hang out, started doing a study group. I could help them convey their thoughts a lot better, and they could show me how to do math, because math's a universal language. These are things that I would have never gotten as a student if we didn't have this program in the first place.
I love that. And of course we love our colleagues at Prairie View State A&M as well. No, the one piece that I really appreciate about all this, particularly Marie, you talked about customer service. On the American staff side as well, is that idea of cross-cultural exchange, right? How you encounter guests from other places, how you talk to classmates from other places. It has to learn and change. And if 95% of the world's customers are outside the US, these are highly transferable skills in business, in hospitality, in tourism, in politics, all of these key areas that are built when we have Americans and international participants mixed together to achieve a goal, like passing their economics exam or making sure there's safety on a ride. So I love all of those different really practical skills that are built by the Americans who encounter international participants, and the international participants too. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to touch on something, John, you've raised a couple times, the challenge that the program sometimes encounters. And all of our colleagues here, I think, want to be advocates, not necessarily in a lobbying way, but folks who stand up for the program and talk about the many returns that it delivers. So in each of your opinions, how can the Bridge USA community best explain the impact of these programs as it relates to prosperity? And in particular, if there's data that you think should be collected, or if real stories that you find very compelling when you're talking to different audiences, I think those would be really useful examples for our participants to have with them. So when someone says, Jay, what? Or Bridge, huh? They really have the chance to say, no, let me tell you how this advances US interests as well as the interests of participants. And John, since you're laughing, I'm going to start with you first.
Well, Carmen, thank you for making this webinar a little fun and make me laugh. And setting me up for a wonderful shameless plug, because spread the word and get more folks to join Capital. That can certainly help amplify all the good work that everybody's doing. in terms of confronting challenges that are around the next corner or around the next turn, it depends upon your audience, but data tends to help, particularly with Republican offices, at least in my lobbying experience. And when you meet with a Democratic official or a Democratic member of Congress, the stories are really what relate to them. I don't know why this is. It is what it is. But I truly think whenever you're talking about how this benefits the Americans who come across anybody who participates in this program, that's a winning message regardless of one's, political preferences. So to the extent that you can say, like, this is how this program benefits America. This is how it benefited this business. This is how it benefited this community in a place where you probably wouldn't think, like, I'm thinking of where I come from, like the North Country, New York. It is, with a rare occasion, that's about as ruby red a place you're going to get in New York State as any place. And it's those communities that depend upon this stuff so much, whether it's Lake Placid or it's Lake George or it's Schroon Lake or it's Loon Lake, or it is Gore Mountain, Whiteface, you name it. And there's other places in New Hampshire and Vermont too. It's skiing the east. If you can ski, Gore Mountain, you can ski anything, because sometimes it's just a sheet of ice and you're just sliding down. But my point is, you wouldn't have that type of economic activity in that part of the state if you didn't have the J1 program helping make it what it is. And those types of things, like when you put it in the perspective of, if we didn't have these J1 workers coming here, this American who was a custodial employee, he's still doing custodial jobs, but he's now managing a team of 5 or 6 underneath him or her. And that helps bring about new opportunities for the Americans who work for these companies that utilize these programs. And it's not all that dissimilar from what you hear in other contexts, whether you're talking about H-1B or H-2A or H-2B or any other, alphabet soup category that an American company relies upon to meet its workforce needs. But it's a different flavor. And that, to me, is the best way to get the point across, because that's where you get bipartisan agreement on the benefits that this program brings. And I know most of the examples I'm using are typically the summer work travel program. The same thing can be said for intern, trainee, can also be said for a research scholar, which, there was a big initiative back in 2022. I think there's still there unexplored potential in that last particular category. Because if you think about trying to expand research and development for all sorts of things, whether it's Dow Chemical or it's Intel or it's TSMC or Microsoft or any of these large name brand Fortune 100 firms that are out there, there are opportunities that those companies could use that particular program. And you think of the issues that they run into and the ability to exchange ideas and ways of looking at doing research. Because when you're doing research, you're going through the scientific method. Like, you have your hypothesis, like, all right, let's run it and see what happens. Sometimes it works, many times it doesn't. But that one time you hit pay dirt, you could talk about the very next medical advancement in the country. We shouldn't be foreclosing the possibility of reaching those new heights, whether it's in pharmaceutical research or it's in AI and semiconductors and things like that. We should be having all these tools available to us. And if we have a bigger J1 program that allows us to do this, it's a bigger tool. There's more possibilities. Everybody wins.
Thanks, John. I love that focus both on the hyper local as well as the aspirational future, and how both of those can be arrows in your quiver to pull out when you need to really make the case. Marie, how about you? What do you think are great either data or stories or ways that folks can really tell the story about the impact of Bridge USA?
Well, one of the things I want to ask everyone here on the call is to just really think about doing everything they can to make their program a model program. You know, when I was at the State Department, there was a lovely person who ran a program out of Chicago, and she wanted to have more leadership training. And she came down to the State Department. She actually had scholarships she created, and she actually had I don't want to say the name, but she also created a whole leadership training program. A leadership training program is something you could do at any one of these programs, which is really important. I also would add that for those that don't know these programs, I think it's really important that you show that you're doing everything you can to advertise to hire Americans. I think that's really important. I think that's one of the things that people also, ask is, are we going to be displacing Americans? Now, the stories we've talked about today, we haven't displaced them, okay? But I think it's really important that you are ready and have a really strong case to do that. The other thing about creating a strong case is to ensure you're actually measuring and creating data. I'm just thinking of things that I would want to know. How much did your business increase? How many jobs were created? How many customers did you get in addition because you were open longer? How many dollars did that mean? How did that impact your suppliers? How did that impact the community? These are all things, I looked at several websites and I was reading online, but not everyone's sharing this kind of information. A lot of it's more anecdotal. So-and-so met a person in another country and they've stayed in touch and they're great friends. But I think it's really important to also measure those results and just as kind of a best practice. So that's what I would really also say. And how many businesses, as far as increasing in business, I think that's really important. And so just generally, just net, I think you can safeguard a lot of this by ensuring that you have really a robust measurement. And the other thing is that people cannot remember speeches, but people can remember stories. Every speech I ever gave at the State Department, I had to give, or in any group, I always had 2 to 3 stories in every speech. That was a requirement. What did Marie say? Well, they can retell a story. So you have to become a really good storyteller. But these stories, and we've talked about stories today, right? But these stories are really, I think of Rick, who went to Uzbekistan. That's a story that we've told before. And he went off when he was younger to Uzbekistan to the House of the Future. It was a U.S. exhibit. And he was in the first room, which was the kitchen. And when he worked for me, he asked me if he could go back to Uzbekistan. And what happened was a person came up to him and said, Rick, I met you years ago. I think it was in the early 70s at the Room of the Future. And Rick said, why? This is unbelievable. And there was also a young girl that showed the brochure because she was 9 years old and she waited in line with her parents. The man that actually was in that room when Rick came back said, you were the first American I ever met, and I'll never forget that. You made an impact on me. So I want to share that for everyone here, because I've heard a lot of interesting stories when I was in my position. I just thought of one where a young man had a preconceived notion that Americans were not very tolerant or nice to people from the Muslim faith. He was needing a charger for his phone, and he came to a store that was out of chargers. The story I heard was that the store owner said to him, get in my truck. The store is closing, but we'll drive around to other stores and see if we can find you one. and he was shocked. Now, I always believe Americans will do the right thing, and that's how Americans are. But that's actually changing perception. But I just want to also add for everyone is just the interfacing of people from another culture with the United States. That's just so important of how we act every day, on how that person perceives. But that's an example of a great story too. But if you can add measurements to that, right? So these are just the things that I think. And that's why, like, even on the story of how exchanges pay off for Americans, one country was doing a program called WEST. It's Work, English, Study, and Travel, and that was Korea. And what happened was I met with alumni, and their English was impeccable. They're out in Korea, but they had come to the United States for 18 months. And one of the benefits was that these American companies now had employees. They were working for American companies in Korea that were new American work ethic. They were also fluent in English, and they were great workers because they'd already worked in those companies. So that's a great example. I mean, we have a lot of great examples to share, but I would just love to see everyone doing that type of thing, because I think that really, as John was talking about, let's say Capitol Hill, or even every stakeholder out there, because I've read the press, and I think we can keep generating great stories. And I want to applaud everyone here who's actually has done work with the media, and actually sharing some of those wonderful stories with the press, because those are the things that make people realize how great the Bridge USA program is. Thanks.
Thank you. And I love, Marie, that you not only focused on the best practices piece that is so critical to Capital's work, but also the storytelling piece. And those are the three pillars of what we're aiming to do. So I appreciate the plug from both you and John for folks. And I invite all of our members who are on this call, share your stories, help us with that data, help us understand what this means for you as you work on so many different parts of the ecosystem around Bridge USA. So this is this wonderful moment to come together and take up that challenge that Marie gave us about that both specific data as well as those wonderful, compelling stories. So as we wrap up, I want to thank both of our panelists. Thank you so much for all of your great wisdom and all of your insights. Thank you to our attendees. I want to ask you all who are here to just complete a super quick poll to let us know how we did. And while you do that, I'm going to put in a very cheap plug for our next one of these Making the Case webinars. So today we talked about the relationship between Bridge USA and economic prosperity. On April 1st, we're going to be talking about the relationship between Bridge USA and public diplomacy and how the US lives in the world. So please be sure to register for that. If you don't have the link or you need it, please reach out to me. We're also going to be doing another couple case study webinars. Perhaps some of you joined us last week for the case study on J1 housing in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, but you'll see more of those pieces rolling out as well so that we can accept Marie's challenge to always be the best programs we can be with all of the different roles that we play within the Bridge USA family. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Marie, for all of your great advice. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Capital webinar. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you to everyone here. Thank you. Right. Bye.
Bye. All right.